Hey guys, welcome back to Tennis 360, the podcast where we talk about all things tennis. My name's Anthony Hirsch.
I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
Welcome back to the podcast. So, a bit of in-week update after the first week of Rome. Going over all the results so far. The ATP guys are in the quarterfinals now, and the WTA are halfway through completing their quarterfinal matches. And yeah, the tournament thus far, we've had a lot of upsets on the ATP side, tons of upsets, with Rublev going out, with Medvedev going out today to Tommy Paul, Medvedev being the defending champion, and also Rune going out. We've had loads of upsets. Rublev, the Madrid champion, as well. The tournament seems very wide open. And Tommy Paul played a fantastic match. He's not really known for clay court kind of prowess, but taking out the defending champion, moving very well from the back of the court. What do you think about that match today? And what do you think about the men's side in general at the moment?
Yeah, the ATP draw looking more like the WTA side of previous years in terms of complete draw collapse. And I think some worthwhile conversation there around this new kind of 12-day format. Hearing a lot from ATP players more than WTA players on the formatting, but definitely raising some very interesting points in terms of kind of these back-to-back weeks that we've had since getting to Europe for the clay court season, and kind of the impact that that's having on results, the lack of consistency that we're seeing. We kind of had some consistency in Monte Carlo and Barcelona, and it feels like ever since then it's fallen off. And it definitely raises alarm bells and questions ahead of the French Open. So yeah, a lot of different things to kind of think about and consider, all of these different factors going into why the big names are no longer in the draw. But I think it's also an exciting opportunity now for one of these other players to get their hands on big points ahead of this Grand Slam, and kind of some interesting battles that we talked about last week in terms of players who are battling to get into top 10, the American players battling for the American #1 status. So a lot of room for maneuverability for folks kind of ranked between 10 and 15 who are looking to jump on an opportunity to really boost their ranking. So I think it makes still for an interesting tournament, albeit quite different from what we're used to.
Yeah, some unpredictability after, I feel like, for about a year's time, we had those kind of guys of Medvedev, Alcaraz, and Djokovic kind of leading everything. But it creates a lot of unpredictability right before Roland Garros, where we haven't had a whole lot of different Slam champions over the last several years, but with Djokovic and Rafa in particular going out in the way that they did at the start of this tournament, I mean, these are two guys that from 2005, 2022, at least one of them was always in the final every year. Only two of those years they didn't win the tournament. So for 2 days apart, for Djokovic to lose 6-2, 6-3 to Alejandro Tabilo, and for Rafa to lose 6-2, 6-3, you start to feel like maybe we're entering or already are in a new era of the game. It might already be for everybody who's been saying, okay, but Djokovic is still going to be able to dominate peak and all of these kind of things. Maybe we have to wake up to the fact that the golden era dominance that we once knew might not be what we once thought. And either way, it seems like everything is really wide open for Roland Garros. I do agree, or I think that the 2-week Masters is a bit much for the players, and I think we're seeing the toll of that at the moment. With also going from conditions of Madrid to Rome is very kind of just, it's a lot of physical playing on clay, and also going from different conditions and week after week. It just allows very little rest for the players. So I think that's what we're seeing, and it allows opportunity. Tsitsipas is still in. I think he's the big favorite, in my opinion, at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the 12-day or 2-week Masters tournaments, it's the calendar congestion too. I mean, I think this is our 5th Masters now since March 1st, and it's May 14th. So it's just so many tournaments back to back. We also had a 500 thrown in there, a couple 250s thrown in there too. So the schedule is so jammed for these top players. There's just very little time to recoup and actually see some consistency. I mean, I think at the beginning of this clay court season, we talked very seriously about Ruud and Tsitsipas really wanting to stamp their authority on the clay court season and make themselves a contender for Roland Garros. They both did well at the beginning, but have been feeling the effects of having deeper runs early on, with both having early round losses. Tsitsipas in Madrid and Ruud here in Rome just kind of gasses out the tank. So definitely question marks around how that can get better, and how this part of the season can also be a better experience for fans. I think there's been a lot of really good online conversation around just like how challenging it was to have multiple quarterfinals or rather 16 matches all in one day, and not getting the chance to be able to see them. So I think in general, the continued questions about the tour scheduling tend to come up. But in terms of the Djokovic Nadal question, I mean, I think for Nadal, I've had maybe more measured thoughts on what he could really do this clay court season. You know, being excited to see him play again, getting the fans have an opportunity to watch him, still be able to compete, be able to play a couple 3-set matches back to back, and kind of prove that he can physically hang. But I didn't necessarily have high expectations in terms of his ability to win a title this clay court season, or even to make a really deep run. With Djokovic, I thought some interesting results recently. Obviously, strange loss to Arnaldi at Indian Wells, then didn't play Miami, then lost to Ruud in Monte Carlo, and then took a rest. And I know there's a lot of kind of question marks around the whole water bottle incident, which I think are fair to entertain, especially given that we don't know answers yet on kind of how much that may have impacted him. But I do think, you know, this is a tournament that Djokovic would typically look to have a very good run in, and really try to kind of squash the doubts of his ability to be a contender at Roland Garros, and again have his opportunity to kind of put his marker down on where he's at with his tennis at the moment. And he's just not had the opportunity to do that. And whether that was because he was mildly concussed, or whether because he's had another really random off performance like he had at Indian Wells, which was just kind of, you know, one of these days for him, I think it does raise the question of motivation, and also how much this team change might impact him. That stability that he's had for such a long time with Ivan Isavic and his kind of physio team and that crew. But he would certainly have wanted to get a couple more matches under his belt ahead of Roland Garros to, you know, get some fitness in the legs back. And I think that this will be a big concern for him, and will certainly make it, from a bookie's perspective, more likely that the odds will kind of be wide open, and room for upsets and room for the draw to fall apart. And I mean, I think it's also not just those two. It's obviously we're without Alcaraz and Sinner. Medvedev loses early, but the remainder of the top 10 here has not been consistent either. We see an early loss from Ruud. We see an early loss from Rublev, Dimitrov. None of these players, Rune, none of them are making it deep. And so it's kind of like, are they all just having a bad point in the season at the same time? Are other guys really getting a chance to kind of come up and show their stuff on clay? But either way, I think this clay court season from the ATP side is so different from what we've seen for the last 20 years. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing or a bad thing, but we've been spoiled with consistency for such a long time that I think us tennis fans tend to freak out, like when it's none of our kind of big names at the top. And I think that this is just the start of a kind of reordering of the era. It doesn't mean that those two are officially done, but I think it does mean that the tide is turning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if we define an era as potentially over, say that Djokovic doesn't pick it up at Roland Garros and win the title or something like this, I will be curious how history looks back on the end of the era. I still say that saying that Djokovic is going to have loads of chances to win more big titles, but yeah. I will be curious to see how history looks back on this moment, and if Sinner's win at the Australian Open, for example, was kind of the final blow of Sinner and Alcaraz really turning the tide, as you say as well. But yeah, I mean, the quarterfinals as we have it now are Tabilo versus Zhang. We've got Zverev versus Fritz, Tsitsipas versus Jarry, and Hurkacz versus Paul. So absolutely wide open. And yeah, I mean, Zverev against Fritz. Zverev leads that TED 4-3, but Fritz has won 2 of their last 3 meetings. They haven't played on clay, though, which I think is always a very important thing to look at because things really vary surface to surface.
I think that'll be a very interesting match.
Yeah,
as you say, because the last 2 matches, it almost feels like Fritz has kind of figured out the Zverev backhand. Like, Fritz has been totally fine to hang with the Zverev backhand, and I think it's stressed Zverev out because that's, usually is a weapon of choice. So I'm very interested to see how that one's going to go.
Yeah, I think it should be interesting as well. I think that Fritz's prowess on clay is as good as ever now, and he's much better at defending out that backhand side too. So that could be really interesting, especially because Zverev's playing well, but I don't know if he's necessarily at his best at the moment. I don't think so. So yeah, I would really have a big eye on Fritz. He's already taken out a few great players in this tournament, like Dimitrov in the last round, who's playing pretty well as well. Despite blinking a few times in that match, but still playing a decent match across the board. And then Tsitsipas versus Jarry. Weird head-to-head, 3-2 for Jarry. He's won 5 of the last 7 sets. I remember a straight sets match that Jarry won, I think in Mallorca last year. It was on the grass courts. And Jarry, for some reason, he loves playing top guys. He picks it up against top guys. He can struggle against guys who are sometimes lower ranked, much lower ranked, outside of the top 50 even. But when he plays against a top 10er, for whatever reason, his percentage is quite good. And I think that he can really trouble Tsitsipas a lot, especially because his backhand, I think, is much more, can be very reliable, actually, and very kind of aggressive as a weapon. And that can be really tough for Tsitsipas to deal with when he's rushed off the backhand. So it's going to be a little bit easier for him in Rome, though. But Jarry loves clay. And I think that'll be a tough one for Tsitsipas. And like I did say, I do think Tsitsipas is the big favorite at this point, but that's going to be a tough one, the next one. So I think both of those are big matches for this event. Also, you've got Hurkacz Paul, which is 1-1 head-to-head. And you also got Tabilo versus Zhang. Do you agree about Tsitsipas being the big favorite, or is somebody else really catching your eye from that?
Oh, no, absolutely. I think Tsitsipas is the big favorite, and I think he would also look at that list and pick himself as the favorite to win this tournament. Given his credentials on clay, he certainly, has the skill set to win. But I agree with you. I think that Jarry poses a really difficult challenge for him in this quarterfinal match. Obviously, clay being Jarry's preferred surface as well, and he's coming in with a little bit more momentum than he had before Miami. He's got a couple of decent wins under his belt, so Jarry will, kind of see this as a I have nothing to lose moment, and this might be my best opportunity to get to a Masters semi. So I agree. I think that could be a challenging matchup, and the other one between Hurkacz and Paul, I think Hurkacz got his first clay court title this year. Could it kind of be like a Medvedev style run? Somebody whose game style we don't usually expect to do well on clay is managing to put it together, put a couple of runs together, and have some good tournaments on the clay. I mean, he's looked very, very solid the last few tournaments and presented some, good challenges against top players on this surface, which I think is key. And Tommy Paul is a guy that I felt like he was peaking a little bit at Indian Wells. Then obviously kind of had the ankle injury in Miami, and we weren't sure kind of movement wise how he'd be feeling on clay. But let's go back to his junior Grand Slam resume is a title at the French Open. He knows how to play on clay. I think he sort of referred to it on social media that he is kind of refining some of that form and love of playing on clay and some of that movement. And I think that Tommy Paul out of the American guys is kind of the best mover, athletically is just really compact and really solid. And I do think he'll fancy himself to, push himself up against Ben Shelton, because Fritz, Shelton, and Paul are all very stacked together in the rankings, just outside of the top 20. So top 10, sorry. So he'll see this as a big opportunity. He also really has great movement, as I said, on the court, but comes to the net well, can finish points from a volley perspective. So I think he'll be looking to kind of be a little bit more crafty and kind of try to stretch Hurkacz and force him to move, because I don't think Hurkacz loves to move on this surface. So he'll be really looking to pound that serve. And then Tabilo versus Zhang. I think Zhang's put in a couple runs on clay courts before, but obviously both of them new to this Masters 1000 situation. Is it a best for Zhang? Has he made a quarters?
He made quarterfinals Madrid last year.
Okay, yeah.
So second one.
Yeah, he'll kind of fancy himself to one up that and better that, but I don't actually think he moves particularly well on the clay, so I'm not really sure what about this surface he really likes. But I mean, the two of them will just be pinching themselves for an opportunity and do anything they can to get to a semi. So in a way, I'm actually pretty stoked about these quarterfinal matches. They all have kind of interesting storylines and make for an interesting semifinal. Friday? Is it Friday? I don't know.
Yeah, I think the quarterfinals are really split up over 2 days. I think there's a day where we have just 2 men's quarterfinals and nothing else going on. So I don't know why the tournament is set up so weirdly that I just feel like we have all these round of 16s in one day, and then we just have days with such little play. It just feels like obviously there are ways to do it better, but yeah, I agree about Tabilo versus Zhang. I mean, Tabilo, we saw how big his serve and his forehand are against Djokovic. And Zhang has explosive power off the forehand too, so I think we're going to see some huge forehand hitting in that match. Zhang, I think, has kind of gone a little bit under the radar in this event. He played a fantastic match against Shelton, so we're going to see how he's able to do. Hurkacz versus Paul. Paul has gone through very one-sided matches so far in the event. He hasn't lost a set yet, and he's a guy who's 18-7 on the season. He won a title, was it in Dallas, and then he got to the final of Delray Beach. So I think he's gone a little bit under the radar in the season, and I think that's kind of translated to clay. Medvedev obviously wasn't at his best. The first set, I felt like he was a step slow, especially with Paul moving as well as he was on the clay, and the second set, I felt like Medvedev's serve was just not there. But that being said, I feel like Tommy Paul is somebody to look out for, because similar to Hurkacz, I mean, I also know that Paul was a Grand Slam junior champion at Roland Garros, but I wouldn't expect his game to do that well on clay, to be honest. And so he could be another kind of Medvedev kind of run if he pulls it together here. So some good underdogs. I don't mind unpredictability, and I think that's a silver lining, I would say, in this tournament. But I think from there we can move on to the WTA side, where the quarterfinals, we had 2 matches today. Swiatek defeated Madison Keys, just as she did in Madrid as well. And also we have Gauff defeating Zhang in a very, very close first set, where both players played very well, but I felt like we're kind of blinking at the wrong times. But it was Gauff who pulled through at the very end, her serve coming in clutch as well on the clay, and some great shot making from both. But Coco, I think, just a little bit more reliable, especially from the back of the court than Zhang, a little bit more consistent, and that pulling through on the clay just moves so well. Both of them are great athletes though, and Swiatek continuing to look so good. Did you have any other thoughts about the quarterfinals earlier today?
Yeah, I think this is a really important run for Coco Gauff, who, kind of hasn't been in the hunt for titles really since making the semifinals at the Australian Open. She's just kind of fallen short at a number of tournaments, just hasn't quite had the luck on her side, and hasn't quite had the same kind of hot streak that she had towards the end of last year. So I think she really needs this result in order to kind of go into Roland Garros really feeling deserving of that number 3 spot and feeling like she's a contender for that title. I think that she's playing good tennis. I think she would admit that it's not her best tennis. But again, she's proving that she can figure things out when she's not playing her best. And that's the sign of somebody who, really is a champion, because it's so unrealistic to expect to see somebody's best at all times. And sometimes you play yourself into form when you get a little bit of confidence. So maybe we'll see some of that kind of start to come together for her. I mean, Swiatek just looks scary on the clay. I don't know what else to say other than the loss in Stuttgart to Rybakina, which will definitely kind of have her scratching her head. I think she most certainly goes into this tournament in Rome as a favorite, but also goes into Paris as the favorite. It's just ruthless hitting. The backhand return in particular is on fire at the moment, and she's just picking everything off that's not, hit right to the tram lines or hit with top speed. She's just finishing it. So I think nobody's really looking forward to facing her. And unfortunately for Madison Keys, she just continues to get creamed by Swiatek and can't seem to find an answer for her game plan. And, sometimes you come up against players like that where there's just nothing really you can do in terms of that. You just play your game and it's a bad matchup. But Swiatek will certainly be looking forward to her match with Coco Gauff. I think she'll fancy herself to win that one as well. And then the other two quarterfinals are also interesting between Ostapenko and Sabalenka, probably the two biggest or two of the biggest hitters on the tour. Sabalenka did seem like she picked up a kind of jarring back injury during her match against Svitolina. Who knows with backs kind of how she might be feeling there. But I in that match, the commentators were saying that Sabalenka's never had a professional retirement during a match, which is actually really impressive. When you kind of think about like women's top level tennis, like we see a fair number of retirements going on at times, and she's never done that, which is actually pretty impressive, I must say. She battled through that and managed that really well against Svitolina. And Svitolina didn't take a bunch of her opportunities, that must be said. But I was so impressed by the Sabalenka drop shot. She was just pulling that out like every other point. And Svitolina was probably having nightmares about that. Just like how many more times is this gonna happen to me? But that head-to-head,
I would say she's having nightmare about the drop shot also because she missed a drop shot on match point. I mean, that shot is really gonna haunt her nightmares for sure. And Sabalenka was ruthless in that second set. Breadstick just full of drop shots every other point.
It was crazy. It was a lot of fun to watch. And then Ostapenko, who came through a match against Shramkova, a player that I wasn't familiar with before this tournament, to be honest, but someone who's actually kind of a veteran on tour, has been playing professionally for more than 10 years. So she's been around, but really had a good go of it this week and definitely pushed Ostapenko right to the limit. They had a third set tiebreak as well. In terms of the Ostapenko-Sabalenka head-to-head, it's 0-2 in favor of Sabalenka. Their last meeting was in 2023, and that went 3 sets. Where I think the big challenge area for Ostapenko is going to be her second serve. Sabalenka is so good at just being aggressive on the front foot on the second serve. Ostapenko serves 70, 80 mile an hour second serve sometimes. I mean, it's not deep. It doesn't have spin. It doesn't always have good placement. I think she's so vulnerable from that perspective. I expect her to kind of get pummeled on the return of serve. So she's going to have to be really careful and have a great serving day. But I mean, we know how Ostapenko plays. She's going to go for all of her shots. So that should be a wild match. And then before I pass it to you, the final quarterfinal matchup is going to be between Azarenka and Collins, and they have a head-to-head of 1-1. So 2 veterans on tour, two players that we know are going to battle and going to fight. Where I think this one is going to be interesting is kind of the who's going to be able to dictate play and get on top of the rallies early on. And I do think Collins right now, with the form that she's in, has slight advantage in terms of taking anything that's landing slightly towards the middle of the court and just absolutely hammering it. And it's just got speed to it that even though Azarenka is a fantastic defender, I think it could be a little ruthless for her if she's not able to kind of, start dictating the point from the first or second shot to really kind of prevent Collins looking for that early opportunity to put her foot in the door. So I think 2 really interesting matches coming up there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoyed Sabalenka's, just her fight and her mental game throughout that third set that I think is really underrated at this point. I think that she's proven that time and time again, especially with a few great matches early in Masters this year. I mean, you can point to the final of Madrid and say that she wasted match points, but it was really Swiatek's fight in that match that really brought her over the line, I think, there. And I think that Sabalenka has proven her fight is so good. And it's also just the fact of being able to figure it out. I mean, she was really, I feel like, being outplayed by Svitolina. In the first set, her forehand looked off of it, and Svitolina was so good at defending and I'd say kind of taunting the unforced errors from Sabalenka, but Sabalenka saw Svitolina's return position. It's like, you know what? I actually don't have to go big on my shots. I can hit a drop shot, and Svitolina standing so far behind the court, and not just a drop shot, but a drop shot in like the first or second shot of a rally. And Svitolina just kept her return position was kind of Medvedev-esque near the back of the court, and just hitting the drop shot and catching her out was a good play for Sabalenka, I thought. And I think if she can figure out those kind of plays and also good net play and have the variety against Ostapenko, that'll be really good. And Osrinka Collins is great. Collins has won, I think, 19 of her last 20 matches, so that's a great stat for her. And Osrinka is still in such good form, which is awesome to see. And it's translate to clay as well. Sad to see Rybakina withdraw again due to illness. She should be one of the biggest contenders and one of the biggest names to watch, but it's just unfortunate, really, that she's not in the conversation at this point. I hope that she's healthy for Roland Garros, because we didn't even get that last year. But I'm hoping for the best in terms of for her. And then the other thing is another big result as well. A couple of them is Kerber and Osaka, both comeback players. Osaka beating Kasatkina and Kostyuk, who are both pretty informed players, I think, especially Kostyuk. And great win for Osaka on the clay, figuring it out. I mean, she didn't necessarily, I think, change up her game too much. But listen, when Osaka is cracking the ball, it's there's not much you can do about it, I think. And shout out to her. And she's really making an effort, I think, on the clay. I think she said that before her comeback. And Angelique Kerber performing quite well as well. So I hope that both them can be in the conversation, particularly Osaka, as the season keeps moving forward, and especially on the hard courts later. But it's good to see her having good results on clay and hopefully on the grass as well when we move into June, July, around that type of the year. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of the names coming back, Osaka is the youngest one, and the one that we would assume to have the most kind of runway ahead of her in terms of her career. Kerber's obviously was kind of towards the end of her career before she took her maternity leave anyways. So I also was impressed by her mentality and approach to the clay. I think she had a couple good presses where she talked about watching other matches, watching Nadal, watching Alcaraz, how they kind of go after their shots, and she thought to herself to kind of play with more intention, hit big balls, and not be so tentative in her clay court matches. And I think that that's an important approach for her, and hopefully we'll start to see some deeper runs and some more consistency in the results. It's still kind of hard to gauge really where she's at with that. I'm assuming she will get a wild card or will use protected ranking to get into Roland Garros. I'm not entirely sure, but
I can't remember which one that is, but
but she'll be looking to kind of start making some deeper runs and start expecting that of herself, as you say, especially ahead of the grass court season, where I think she probably has the least experience on the grass, but certainly her game suits it, so she could be a threat there as well. And then the other name that's, kind of been lingering in terms of players making comebacks is Badosa. Just not been able to stay consistently healthy. It's been frustrating for her. She's also talked about, how potentially this back injury is career ending, how there isn't kind of much for her in terms of, ability to heal. It's just about managing, needing to take cortisone injections and things like that. So not good news, and honestly pretty sad for her career, but then also good to see her, kind of put a run of 4 matches together here in Rome. Played a good first set against Gauff, and then in the third set, it just looked like she totally ran out of gas, and just after Gauff got that early break, it was just sort of game over. But a former world number 2, a former Masters champion, somebody who, would say that they like to play on clay, and it's a surface that they're good on, obviously being Spanish. So Just kind of a name to look out and see if she might be able to start, running up some consistency. I'm not sure, but on her day could be dangerous for somebody in that draw, given the fact that her ranking's pretty low now. She could kind of cause some headaches for players in that kind of top 20 range who, probably wouldn't want to face her early on in a tournament.
Yeah, and I'd say the story probably of the WTA at the moment is kind of Iga Swiatek's the big favorite, but who can really test her and take her down, especially for Roland Garros as well. So it'd be good to see Badoza step up. Sakkari, I know, lost to Azarenka, but it'd be good to see Sakkari in there because I think she's one of the best on clay when she's at her best. Sabalenka is still performing well, so we'll see for her, but I think that's kind of what's defining the WTA. It's going to be really interesting to see because it feels like opposite on ATP and WTA with Swiatek so much in control of the clay scene on the WTA, so in control, and the ATP just looks like a complete kind of mess at the moment, partly probably to do with the scheduling as well. But yeah, that's been the Tennis 360 podcast for this week. We'll be back next week to talk about the results and the winners and all of that. And I've been Anthony Hirsch.
I'm Eliza Wastcoat.
See you guys at the next one.